Hi guys, I'm Heidi, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about all the books that I finished in the month of October. I ended up in a reading slump at the beginning of the month. I definitely burned myself out in September and I was struggling a bit even with books that I really liked. I did manage to get out of that slump and finish 5 books, which wasn't great. But considering how I wasn't really reading anything at all for a good 2 weeks at the beginning of the month, I'm still quite pleased. So the first book that I finished was Gideon X by Tamsyn Muir. I already talked about this in a Friday Reads video, so I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here. It's basically an action-heavy mystery with necromancers in space. I was intrigued by the whole necromancers in space thing, and I think it did manage to put an interesting twist on the sci-fi genre. It did have its flaws. I mean, the world building was a bit too thin, and all the characters weren't really that well realized, but it was still quite enjoyable. It was very YA though, which I'm not a huge fan of, but all in all, I still liked it. I gave it 3 stars, and I'm definitely going to continue with the series. I then finished reading The Paragon Hotel by Lyndsay Faye. This was the October pick for the Genre Raiders book club. And the story takes place in the 1920s, and we follow a young woman called Alice who is on the run from the mafia, and she's fleeing to Portland in Oregon. She ends up in the Paragon Hotel, which is a kind of a safe haven for the black residents of Portland, but violence is on the rise, and not everyone is trustful of Alice, and not everyone is happy that she is there. But she does manage to make some new friends, and then she starts investigating a missing persons case. Overall, I enjoyed it, and I enjoy books set in this time period in general, so thank you Chris and Jessica for picking it. I think what it was trying to do was impressive, but lacked depth. It tried to tackle issues such as gender, feminism, race, sexuality, crime, and include a mystery element as well, and at the same time it also had to sort of remain authentic to the time periods, and I'm not entirely convinced of the end result. The historical context was interesting, and I did like the characters for the most part, but I do think that the story was the weakest part. I can't really say that I know much about US history, so reading about Oregon's shady past was also quite interesting. The casual racism was especially harrowing to read, especially passages that dealt with white characters and them not really realizing how harmful they were being. All in all, it wasn't amazing, and it did have its flaws. I did enjoy it. There wasn't really anything that was annoying me that much. I just kind of took note what was meh and kind of just moved on. So yeah, not my favorite book of the year, but I'm definitely glad that I read it. I then finished reading The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley. Because it is October, I kind of wanted to pick up something a bit spookier or creepier, and it kind of pains me to say this, but I didn't really enjoy this that much. I found it a bit boring. The story is easy enough. 4 people show up at a haunted house, or a supposedly haunted house, to figure out if it's actually haunted. There were a lot of weird and sort of meaningless conversations, and the dialogue seemed kind of irritating and childish. I mean, I realized that they were trying to sort of keep the anxiety about the house at bay, but it just didn't seem all that believable to me. I mean, sure, the house itself was interesting, and the way it started affecting the characters, especially the main character who started going mad. But all in all, I just didn't care. I mean, I think maybe I started this with the wrong expectations, but I just didn't find this story particularly creepy or spooky or even interesting. So yeah, I don't know. Unfortunately, this was a bit of a disappointment for me. I then finished The Devil and the Dark Water by Stuart Turton. This was definitely my favorite read of the month, and a very clever story. The story takes place in the 17th century. A ship is about to leave Batavia, which is modern-day Jakarta, but back then it was part of the Dutch East Indies, and the ship is carrying an interesting assortment of passengers. One of these passengers is called Samuel Pipes, who is a kind of a Sherlock Holmes type character, and together with him is his friend Arendt, who is his bodyguard, and Samuel is being transported to Amsterdam to be executed for a crime that he has supposedly committed, although we don't know what it is. And there are also other characters on the ship as well. There's the Governor General, his daughter and his wife, and then there's the whole crew side of things. And there also may or may not be a devil on board the ship. So there's a lot going on, and because Samuel is kept in chains, Arendt has to be the one to figure out what is going on. and I absolutely loved this book. It was all very well thought out. I remember when I was reading The Seven Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle by the same author last year, that one reminded me a lot of Agatha Christie. This one, The Devil in the Dark Water, is very Sherlock Holmes. Although it's more like the Robert Downey Jr. kind of Sherlock Holmes, because there's quite a bit of action in this as well. But it's obvious that Stuart Turton has a talent for these kinds of books. It's atmospheric and it keeps you guessing, and the characters were all interesting, and I enjoyed it so much. I then finished reading The Mermaid and Mrs Hancock by Imogen Hermes Gowar. This was part of my little reading project to read books that have been sitting on my TBR for a very long time. And it was also shortlisted for the Women's Prize for Fiction in 2018. And the story takes place in the 18th century, so this is more historical fiction. It tells the story of a merchant called Jonah Hancock, who is suffering from some financial difficulties. And one day a captain, or one of his captains, shows up at his doorstep and says that he has sold Jonah's ship for what appears to be a real dead mermaid. And then the mermaid becomes a sort of a sensation, everyone wants to see it, and Mr. Hancock's financial difficulties are solved, and his paths cross with Angelica Neal, who is a courtesan in high society, and then we follow those two characters along with a few other minor ones. When I'd finished reading this, I checked out reviews by other people to see what they thought about it, and quite a lot of people thought that it was quite slow and boring. I don't think it was boring, but I think that the main strength of this book was definitely the writing. It was very atmospheric, and the book was also quite descriptive, but also at the same time accurate, and the style fit historical fiction really well. It reminded me a lot of Once Upon a River by Diane Satterfield, actually. Both of these stories take place in Britain. One takes place in the 19th century and the other takes place in the 18th century. Both stories are character driven. Both feature some very beautiful descriptive writing. And there is a supposed supernatural element in both of them as well. So in Once Upon a River, there was a dead child who returned to life, and in this one, it was the mermaid. The plot of The Mermaid and Mrs Hancock was mostly there to support the characters, and I do agree with those who are saying that it wasn't the strongest. But then again, I don't think that this book was meant to be massively plot-driven anyway. I would have liked to know more about a few minor characters, and there were bits that weren't really wrapped up that neatly. But all in all, it was very enjoyable. I would say that it's a slow and quiet sort of book, but it does have some beautiful writing, and it is definitely very impressive for a debut novel, so I would recommend this. So these were all the books that I read in the month of October. Please let me know if you've read any of these and what your thoughts were. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!